Okay. So I'm here with James Chillcott. That's how you say it, right? James
It
Chillcott.
is indeed, John.
All right. Well, this is my first time actually meeting you, so thank you for joining me.
Yeah, we've interacted dozens of times on social media, but we've never gone face to face in person or on stream. So lovely to meet you.
Yeah, that's right, man. I will say that I really respect your opinion, and I appreciate all the information that you give the community. And I think that you're one of the best speculators out there. So let me just start by saying that.
I appreciate it. Um, I mean, likewise, I think there are a lot of people that have been involved in the grind of MTG finance over the years that would reference some of your earliest content production back in the day as the stuff that got them started, including multiple of the writers on MTG Price.
Yeah, definitely. I think a lot of people would attribute that, and I appreciate that. I think it's great. There's a lot of different points of view when it comes to magic finance, which is why we're here today. I made a tweet, and that's what we want to discuss, right? This tweet that I made.
Yeah, I think that the topic of the day is, what are the methodologies that the average player can employ to pursue the goal of making or saving money while playing Magic the Gathering. So whether you are a player looking to build a large collection and you want to do that as cheaply as possible, or you are a tour grinder who is trying to get in and out of decks as effectively as you can, or you are more on the speculation side where you're trying to figure out what's going to be hot later and add to your bottom line. The debate is about what are the various strategies you could employ and what is likely to work best.
Right, and so what you did there, for what I heard you do at least, is in a way define magic finance, right? Because when I talked about, I said I'll read the tweet so that people can understand, and we'll read it again as we start to tackle the points of the tweet. But the tweet was the best magic finance is basic math. Buy cards for a percentage of the market price, then sell them for the market price. That's how you win all your call shots. So that was my tweet. Reading it now, it feels a little bit.
We're
It
a little
feels.
further down the road from where we started.
Yeah, yeah. But so we're talking about the context of magic finance, right? And what does that mean to you? Because you say it's mainly a player thing, right?
Yeah, I think that one of the things I call into question is the assumption that I think often comes from the vendor side that the goal of MTG Finance is to approximate the actions of the vendor. And that the assumption is that what vendors do, the largest vendors or the most successful vendors or the vendors that are most effective, presumably measured by growth of their company and or the return on investment they're getting from that operation, is what the average player should be reaching for. And for a variety of reasons, I think that generally is the wrong approach. And when I think of MTG Finance coming from a player perspective, I think of it as something that is almost exclusively for the players because for a couple of reasons. One, I think the vendors are often already in the pocket, as
Mm-hmm.
it were. It's their job. They're doing it every day. They
Right.
have methods that work better or worse than their competitors, and they are jostling in the market, trying to figure out who has the best approach. But a lot of what they do is not repeatable or accessible to the average player. And so when we're producing content, whether it's from MTG Price or by Speculation or yourself or whoever is putting it
Mm-hmm.
out there, Chaz at SEG, etc., um, most of that content tends to be generated for players, not vendors. And vendors haven't really shown much interest in consuming that content other than at the very low end of the market. For instance, in the MTG Price Pro Trader cohort, we have quite a few vendors, but a lot of them are smaller vendors that are looking for guidance in terms of pricing cards.
Yeah.
And that doesn't really apply to the same, the vendor pool that shows up at GPs all the time.
Right, right. That's a smaller deal. But I find it fascinating that you would apply the magic finance concept to like make it more of a player thing than just like a broader concept where we're just talking about the business of magic, right? the business of buying and selling cards, and what all that includes. If you think about like the early roots of Magic Finance, one of the very first Magic Finance writers was Ben Bleiweiss from Star City Games, and
Sure.
what he would do is he would give you like the insight into what was happening at Star City, like what was selling, what cards that he felt like would sell because he has the experience, of managing the acquisitions and the sales of Star City. So, like looking at that information, that's not a player information, that's vendor information, right? Like a vendor could look at that information from Star City and do something with it. Wouldn't you
Sure.
say so?
Sure. So when a vendor is speaking to other vendors
Mm-hmm.
and providing information that is useful to them, there are certainly applications to the player, but because the available methodologies are so different, and gets to the heart of my response to your original tweet,
Right.
to assert that a buy list is going to provide the best results suggests that it is the best ROI and that it has the best risk reward profile for the person that is making a choice. And the thing is that you do a lot of work with actual vendors,
Right.
right?
Yeah,
So
I do consulting for.
boxes on stream from within a vendor.
Right. Right.
And so clearly there's going to be, you are in the pocket dealing with buy list as a scenario. You are making an offer that is more or less probably the same as most buy lists would make.
Right.
With
Well, my offer's the best. Let's make that clear. My offer's always the best. So.
So, making an excellent buy list offer. But my argument is that let's say that the average buy list is 40% below street value or something.
Yeah, like let's say like a 60% of TCG market is like a buy list number, right? 60%, right? Yeah, we'll just say that.
So if you're buying a play set of Scalding Tarns and they are $100 a piece at market, market, and you're buying them at 60, then you have an implied return of 67%. So there's an upper boundary in place that is set by the average buy list versus the current market that is not in place in other opportunities. So for instance, 3 key examples that have been very profitable this season come to mind. One is the access to asymmetric information. So for instance, a really good example would be that last week on Walmart, their MJ Holdings had Commander 2016 decks listed as Japanese for purchase at $37 US. Shipping works out to about $40. The trick was you had to ship them to your local Walmart, and depending on the distribution center, they had more or less of various decks available. Right. But the Atraxa deck goes for $200 in the open market, can be buy listed in the 160 to 180 range, and is heading upward, obviously because Atraxa is getting a lot of attention with War of the Spark and was already more or less the top commander of all time. Right. So Japanese decks, though, are really tricky because you've got a buy lists are going to, a lot of buy lists won't be interested in those.
They'll pass on those. Right.
And, but we discovered, in the Pro Trader cohort that by experimenting with ordering a couple, they actually showed up in English.
That's awesome.
So if you are able to use a time machine and order Atraxa decks from Walmart for $40 a piece and then flip them for somewhere between 120 and 160, you're looking at 2, 3, 4 times return.
Right, but that's not speculation though, right? To be fair, that's just arbitrage, right? You just
sure. Well, but that's my argument, right? It's not necessarily speculation that's going to be buy list. There are a number of different methodologies that will.
Well, you could look at that like buy list because you're buying it at buy list essentially. You know what I mean? So, like if I saw Atraxa decks for $40, I would buy them. Like there's not because I wouldn't be like, oh, I'm above that because that's not Magic Finance. No, if I saw them, I would buy them. Because.
And indeed, we shared that information with some vendor partners, and they did buy them.
Yeah. So I mean.
But what I'm saying, it isn't buy list, because buy list is the process of making a blanket offer available to the market, saying, bring me all of your cards, and I will give you a price for them that will be below market, but the benefit will be that you get to unload them to me now. You don't have to try to sell them individually. You don't have to
Right.
trade them out with your friends. So that's a very specific methodology.
And that has become that has actually become really good for players because of the competition is so high that when we're offering buy lists, I sometimes offer 75% on certain cards. And so when you sell them on TCG Player after fees and shipping, you're not looking to make much more than what I'm offering you, to buy them, and so that situation has become, the margins have become thinner. I mean, back in the day, you used to buy cards at between 30 to, 30 to 50%, and that was pretty commonplace. But now the buy lists have become much more aggressive. So in order to compete in the market, you have to pay more on a buy list. But
and that's driven by the GP centric nature of a lot of buy listing activity, and also the fact that people are walking around with smartphones, right?
No, actually, it's driven by sick deals is what it's driven by, because sick deals and TCG Player taking the gate down and letting players sell on TCG, because now what has happened is players have more access to the market. Okay, players didn't have that access to the market before, so there's another level. Now, sure, the GP vendor stuff and that kind of thing has something to do with it, but it's more to do with players understanding, well, I could just put it on sick deals, and then I can sell it for 10% less. So unless they have a lot, like if they have some scalding tarns, they're going to put them on sick deals. I'm going to offer $75.
I would argue that for 15 years you've always had the eBay option, which is essentially the same thing, because eBay minus fees is essentially like selling on sick deals.
Yeah, but eBay's spooky, right? Because it's different than like posting a picture on Facebook. People don't understand eBay. That's the difference.
eBay market penetration is pretty high. But to further the original point, the other two major methodologies that I think would generally exceed buy list would be international arbitrage.
Mm-hmm.
So for a long time that meant sourcing cards from Japan,
right,
to bring over to the US. Most recently it's been more about Europe, which many of the big vendors are well aware of and are doing.
Yeah, participating in. Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially vendors that go across the pond to GPs and stuff like that. When they're doing the traveling anyways, it just makes sense to make a package for when you get there to, distribute or whatever.
Right. So over the last couple of years, it's been relatively fresh from the player perspective for content creators to be highlighting that.
Yeah.
And it was about 2 years ago when masterpieces were insanely low in Europe. Largely because EDH isn't as big there, and because a lot of vendors got burned on expeditions when they came out of the gate hot and failed to explode past the level that they started at.
Right.
They took a flyer in many cases on loading up on cheap inventions, which then turned into a pile-on effect down the road. But I think in December 2016, Travis and I were sourcing Masterpiece Soul Rings at $74 on MCM or something, and just loading up.
Well, you guys were really quick to identify that, and I think that's, when you compare that kind of thing, right? You identified this thing in the market, and you also knew that okay, we're going to speculate on this, and also there's this arbitrage opportunity, so you're compounding your gains, and then you won. So if you compare that to the average buy list, right? I bought scalding tarns at $75, we put them in the shop at $120 and sold them, you're like, well, guess what? I bought, Soul Rings at $74 and then I sold them for $400, yeah, if you're going to make that comparison with that one example, I think, it's a relative thing, right? Because we're not going to talk about the example of the card that you bought and then it's still in the box of shame, you know what I mean? That happens as well, right?
Well, a lot of the European arbitrage, though, is if we're making the argument that buy list is anchored by market price, you can confidently buy a scalding tarn at 60, knowing you will sell it between 90 and 100.
Right.
Then you can likewise say that European arbitrage typically centers on picking up things where the buy list already backs you above the level you're paying.
No, for sure. And let's be clear about, let's do some paperwork. So before we continue, let me just do some paperwork. Hello, everybody who's in the chat. welcome to the stream. We appreciate you being here. I hope that this is really interesting for you. One of the reasons we did this is because I feel like discussion about different strategies in Magic Finance would be a good discussion. So this tweet and this disagreement is a great way to kind of dive into the different things that Magic Finance is composed of. So welcome. We appreciate you being here. Second, we'll try to, I guess we'll try to, if James has time, we'll try to answer questions at the end of the discussion. So if you have questions, save them to the end of the discussion. If James has time, we'll answer them. I have a little bit of time afterward, but I don't know if James does. We'll check it on that. He's a busy...
Happy to answer a few questions and try to squeeze some stuff in.
Okay, cool. So that's great. So welcome. Thanks for being here. Okay, so... Oh, wait. So it says Medina's so much louder than James. We should fix that. Okay, I'm louder than James. Okay, let me do this.
I'm turning up my microphone level here. Let me know if this is working.
Okay. It's going to take a minute for you guys to catch up on the stream, but I boost his mic levels, and he's boosting mine.
Yeah, test.
How's that? Is that better? Is that better, guys? So let us know if the mic has improved, and then because we definitely want you hearing James, because like I feel like he's bringing a lot of good information to the table here. Levels are better. Okay, great. Sorry about that, James.
Perfect.
I didn't mean to do that, guys. Really, I wasn't trying to silence him, But it would be funny if he was talking and I just took the mic all the way out, right? And he's just
be a pretty one-sided conversation. Yeah. I don't think anybody would be surprised to see me talk and only myself hear me.
But I would win. That would be the thing. I would win the debate. So coming back to the debate, one thing I want to clarify is, when I made this tweet, it came out of a tweet from another discussion I was having. And actually the original tweet said, if you buy it for a percentage and then sell it for a higher percentage. That was the original tweet, okay? And then I was like, well, I want to kind of like, if I'm going to tweet this out to a lot of people, I want to just make it more kind of more impactful, more like just put some more heat on it. I don't want to because when you say buy it for percentage, sell it for a higher percentage, that introduces all kinds of questions. And a lot of times when you introduce questions, it loses the power of the point. And that's what when I told you before we went on air, I said, precise communication isn't always good communication. And so when I'm trying to communicate something, I sometimes communicate it in a way that isn't precise, but is more thought-provoking or has more power so that it kind of lets people reckon with it. I want them to mentally reckon with the thing that I said. So the reason I say that is because I'm not only talking about Buylist, I'm talking about people being in the position where you get to make a Buylist offer. But I'm not only talking about, buying at Buylist and then shipping at, retail, but I know that I kind of pigeonhole myself when I said selling at market price, right? Because that kind of tagged me to the market price, which means, okay, so I'll concede that.
If we're going up to the 10,000 foot level, I think we can both agree buy low, sell high.
Right. Well,
it's generally where you want to be.
That is a good strategy.
so there's certainly no debate there. My point of clarification on Twitter is exploring the concept that the buy list methodology has an implied margin that is difficult to get beyond, because you can't affect the market price by yourself in that scenario. Mm-hmm. And you can only go so low before nobody will give you their cards. And as you said, you have one of the higher buy list offers in the market. So that actually makes your margin
the best one. Yeah.
Well, the best deal for the player, but the most narrow margin for you.
Right.
So what I'm arguing is that if you are comparing the opportunity to arbitrage into a buy list, and that could be either because you are identifying a card that is going to be hot soon. So a good example would be, you mentioned Mox Amber. You were discussing Mox Amber on Twitter today. And I pointed out, the smart money on Mox Amber was in when we realized that war was going to be about planeswalkers, and whether or not Mox Amber was going to be good, players were going to assume this is what Mox Amber was the plant for.
Right.
This is why they put Mox Amber in Dominaria. Mm-hmm. They're expecting us to play with it. It's probably going to be a 4 of. And that logic would unfold long before we got a chance to look at deck lists. And so back at uh, the Pro Tour in Cleveland in February, I was already picking up, $6 and $7 Mox Ambers that ended up being flipped out at $75. That kind of play is, when it's executed with skill, precision, and within a tight enough time frame, is going to outpace buy list activity on a regular basis. One of the other things.
Can we stop there? Because that's a big statement. That kind of activity is going to outpace buy list. Every time, or
on a regular basis.
On a regular basis.
If it is well executed. I'm not claiming that any and all speculative activity will be better than buy list. What I'm saying is that a buy list has a narrow range of possibility.
Right.
You almost can't make more than a certain percentage on a buy list, whereas speculation does not have that limitation, or the limitation is significantly larger. A 3 to 4 times return is pretty hard to beat.
Uh-huh.
It's just because of the nature of how rarity works and the mechanics of vendors being able to open boxes of in-print sets to knock prices back down to equilibrium, right. Concepts we're generally familiar with. But the ceiling on that activity is much, much higher.
Yeah. So I will definitely agree with that. So the ceiling on a spec, right? Let's just talk about speculation. Let's remove arbitrage for a minute. We'll talk about speculation versus buy list, right? So like when you look at buy list, you do have this little space, right? The space between what you're buying at and what you're selling at. And what you have to sell at is market, right? But with speculation, you have future, right? That's what you're saying. You have because you're timing your buys. Like for a store, we're not timing the same. We're not doing it where our focus is not timing. Our focus is buy, sell, right? Buy, sell. What you're doing is you're buying and then waiting and then selling, right? And then you're recognizing more margin. Am I understanding you correctly?
It's more that the buy list has a fixed percentage of gain that is hard to exceed based on the dynamics of the market, and that is not present in speculation because the only limitations there are related to whether or not the card is currently available and in print. And in the case where it's out of print or has been out of print for a long time, the dynamics just get better and better and better. And so speculation.
I don't understand that. Can you put that in like English for me, because I don't understand.
So like an example would be something like a card that was really bad up to a certain point, and suddenly you get a new commander, say something like Feather.
Right.
And last night on MTG Fast Finance, we were going through our the weekly top movers, right? The 20 cards that moved the hardest this week. Most of them were related to Feather, because Feather is probably going to be the commander people are most excited to build, the best Boros commander we've ever gotten, and a lot of the cards that are good with Feather have never been good before. And because of that, especially with the ones that are out of print, the foils related to those specs have exploded overnight, some 300%, 400%, up to 1,000%. Then you're going to see a retrace, and you can't be ultra super deep on that stuff, but the returns are not limited in the way that a buy list is.
Okay. So the returns of a card that spikes is not limited in the way that a buy list. So like if I bought a Feather card at buy list, how am I limited?
Well, if you can buy a Feather card at buy list before it spikes, then you're even better.
I can. I mean, I do it every day, right? Because like I'm just buying all the cards.
Right, but the problem with buying all the cards is it doesn't sync with the maximum ROI. If you take in a collection,
right,
some of those things are going to move faster or slower than others, but you're probably going to take the whole collection. And you will, depending on how skillful the buyer is, you will maybe decline to take some things. You will offer a greater or lower percentage, depending on how fast you can think you can turn them around. So you're probably more excited to take in Scalding Tarn than you would have been to take in, say, Sunforger 3 months ago.
Well, first of all, I've always bought Sunforgers. That was like what I did because you buy anything that has EDH playability. The thing is I buy everything. So like, and I think every buyer should. They should just buy everything because everything has an out. So like, if you need to like just stack, those full art Zendikar lands, the Battle for Zendikar lands, because some vendors will be like, yeah, we don't want those. Just All of them, right? Because somebody wants them. Okay, somebody wants them, and you just put them all in a box, and then when you find that person who wants them, you just ship those to them. So you should buy everything. I don't think, but I could see how when you come back to like a player versus a vendor, right? So like when you're talking to players as a Magic Finance person, that's your idea. My idea is like when you're talking about Magic Finance, you're talking to everyone. You're talking to players, vendors, everyone who's in the business of selling cards. And so like for a player, sure, they can't afford to buy everything, right? So they do have to be more skillful in, oh, I'll buy this, I'll buy that, you know. Sometimes you lose buys like that because somebody wants to sell it all at once, you know. Right, but so I sorry, I read the chat and someone says buying everything seems hard without massive amounts of capital. But that's the thing.
Well, and I have a different, if I can interject, I have a different point to make about buying everything. Right. I would argue that that is not correct. That you are going to get much better results if you are extremely tactical about if you're in a position to buy list, I think you will do, and you don't have to, and you're not running a store where your goal is to be known in the neighborhood for having everything in stock, which is a pretty specific requirement. And if that is important to the execution of your business model, then you're going to do that. But there are also, as was discussed on Twitter, there are some vendors who have been showing up at GPs and running a buy list operation, but they don't run a store, and most of what they do is cross-border arbitrage in the other direction. So for instance, 95 and other vendors have been involved in shipping cards to Asia.
Right. And what I'll say is that what you did right there is exactly what you did with this tweet. Okay, you took something and you said, well, in this capacity, that's not right. But like everything, you can say that about everything. You can say, well, if you paint the scenario this way, then that's not right. Because there are times where you should buy everything, just like you said, unless you have a store. Well, if you have a store, you should, so.
Sure, but the majority of the people that received your tweet, right, like the 2,000 people that are following you, are not vendors.
Right.
They're players. So when they interpret that tweet, they're thinking, well, I should try to function like a buy list, which might lead them to say operating on CardSphere, for instance. And comparatively to the strategies that we typically suggest to our pro traders through MTG Price, my argument is that is going to be less productive. That casting a wide net and buying collections, which is essentially the closest that the average player can get to buy listing, or operating on CardSphere, which is essentially buy listing, but with a significantly lower margin, because CardSphere operation is going to be a lot closer to SIC deals than it is going to be to true buy listing, because you're just not going to be able to get the same margins.
Right.
So,
well, there's a lot of people on there just offering low, they're just
silly numbers, and
they're throwing the net in and just be like, come on, send me your stuff cheap, and
hoping that somebody makes a mistake.
Yeah, exactly. So
what I'm arguing is that to tactical speculation, cross-border arbitrage, and asymmetric information are typically going to be more productive when executed skillfully than buy list could ever be, even if buy list is also being executed as skillfully, just because those things don't have the same caps on return that a buy list does. That is the crux of my argument.
That sounds good. It sounds like a good argument, but like I told you on Twitter, the proof is in the pudding, man. The biggest players in this game are not speculators. They're people who run operations, man. They're people who have big operations.
I did want some clarity on that. So talk to me about who you think the biggest players are.
Well, TCG player is the biggest player, one of the biggest players. Troll and Toad is one of the biggest players. These guys there's different strategies. Now, will I say that these people are buy list people? Not necessarily, no. TCG player is a service-based operation, essentially. They don't buy list anything. They just let other people buy list it and then sell it on their thing, and they take a fee, right? That's one strategy. Can a normal player employ that? No, but a normal player should understand that. Troll and Toad does similar things with their Evo clients, and they've got so many things going on over there. But Troll and Toad also does have buy list operations, and the people who the person who owns Troll and Toad, that's one of the biggest players. I'm talking about these guys who run these big operations. A lot of their core business started with and very much involves buy listing. And so I would say that we don't see like a a speculation firm, that's
Well,
you
I
understand
mean,
what I'm saying?
you saw towards the end of our Twitter discussion that one of the most talented Buylist operators that we've seen in North America, Paul Fuedo,
Mm-hmm.
poked his head up and said, well, actually, the best of the best are doing both. They're running Buylist operations, but they're also speculating.
Sure.
And I would argue that's true, and that it is that their ROI that comes from them speculating effectively is greater than their Buylist ROI.
Right, but what I would say to that is, and I don't think we've done a very good job of framing this. Let me start there, because when we start talking about best, you said, okay, I said best, which that word is dangerous, right? Because it's
Sure.
like,
Needs to be defined.
right, like what's the best ice cream? Pistachio. Isn't that the best ice cream? Well, no, that's not the best. Okay, best doesn't really mean anything. It means, again, perfect communication.
What does it mean to you is the key question.
Right. And so like if you say, hey, return on investment's best, right? Maybe maybe strategies are doing something else. Maybe you're in a building stage where you're not trying to return on investment, you're trying to market, or you're trying to do something else, So best is subjective. Okay? But you clung to best meaning ROI, or performance, or potential performance is really what you're arguing, is that, hey, potential performance, because the whole thing about speculation is that it's potential. Nobody knows for sure, right? I mean, I have a good idea, right? You have a great idea. You're really smart. You do this well. You're probably right more than you're not, but also that's a potential. And the whole point I was making is, hey, when you buy a card at less than market and then you resell it, that's not potential, that's reality. Okay?
But you're assuming that the market will buy the card. And the question becomes, what's the hold time? So an operator that can convince me that their buy list is just a normal buy list in terms of what they offer,
Mm-hmm.
it's an average percentage on the dollar that they offer the player, no better, no worse than their average competitor,
Right.
but their turnover time is compressed. If somebody can say to me, we only run buy list, but we are so effective at marketing our available cards that we rarely hold things for more than 5 days. And
Mm-hmm.
so our annualized returns are some extreme number. That would really turn my head, right? Because that is really, I think, what defines brilliance in the execution of that particular strategy.
Okay, I'll name someone. Card Kingdom.
I mean, I can't, even though I work with Card Kingdom and many of the other vendors through MTG Price in our vendor team, I don't have access to their turnover percentage. Those are closely guarded.
Yes, of course. I don't have access either. I'm, by the way, guys, not saying anything that I know special information. But what I am saying is the indication of that is A, their buy list prices, and B, their prices. Okay? If you look at any commander staple on Card Kingdom, typically it's going to be higher than even Star City games. Okay? Why is that? That's because of what you just said, marketing, right? So like what they do is they market through, Command Zone podcast, all of these other channels that kind of invite that kind of person to their website, and then they offer high on the buy list. So their margin, they're getting it back through marketing, right? But
through turnover.
Their turnover is, you can tell the turnover is fast because of A, they're paying a lot. Okay? Right. They couldn't pay a lot indefinitely and just hold unless you have infinite money, And second, like the prices, right? They have to put the prices higher, or else the turnover would be even faster. And so
right. But to bring it back around to, mm-hmm. The advice that we are trying to share with our listeners and with the people that follow us on Twitter,
right.
and the people that, read articles on MTG Price, those are players. They don't have access to that kind of an operation. So if they're buy listing, they don't have the marketing clout to mm-hmm. achieve that turnover. And it's the difference between somebody who has like 50 followers on Twitter who are basically just their friends.
Right.
And, somebody like me who's been writing for a few years, I've got 4,000 followers.
Right.
If I put out that I want to sell some cards on a Friday night, I can move some cardboard.
Right.
Relatively quickly. If Card King does it, they can move a lot of cardboard.
Right.
If imagine if LSV does it, he can move a lot of cardboard.
Right.
But the average player doesn't have the social media reach. So they're left, as you said, going to sick deals and trying to unload. And if they were offering a relatively high buy list percentage, say 70% or 75% or 80%,
right,
and sick deals knocks them down to 85 or 90, what I'm asserting is that leaves them a very narrow margin.
Sure.
And they have to be turning over very quickly to make that better than what they could get from, say, to provide an example as an alternate strategy, they could be arbitraging from Europe with guaranteed buy list access. So part of what I'm suggesting is you actually want to be on the flip side. You don't want to be the buy list. You want to lean into the buy list.
Okay.
You want to be selling to the buy list at numbers that are giving you guaranteed profit. No risk.
That depends, right? It depends on how much access you have to capital, I would say, right?
Well, there is certainly a minimum below which your time spent will not be worth it.
Uh-huh.
There's no point obsessing over whether the single $1 card you have can go to $3.
Yeah.
Because your time at minimum is worth minimum wage.
Right.
So, and you have to really compare the time spent on MTG Finance or any other financial hobby to what you could make at your day job or some other side hustle. And so, yes, there's definitely a floor of activity. And if you're not willing to exceed that, then you shouldn't really even be thinking about this stuff. But assuming that you've got hundreds or low, single-digit thousands in play, and that could be either because you are actively speculating, or could just be that you've been a Magic player for 20 years and you've got a huge collection.
Right.
When I got into MTG Finance, as a primary focus, say 6 years ago, I didn't have a spec box. I just had a big collection I built up over time and Modern was taking off, and it was just a good time to be starting to look up card prices and realizing that there was value there. But for the average player, they need to be making the comparison between, what am I spending per year on Magic, and how much could I reduce that by either pursuing one of these high ROI, high reliability strategies versus doing nothing. And if you only buy a single standard deck per year, I might not be able to do a lot for you. But if you're the kind of player that's spending a few $1,000s a year, we've seen consistently in the MTG Price Pro Trader group that we are providing tremendous value by, for instance, connecting players in Europe with players in North America and getting them to create arbitrage
amongst themselves. Right? Yeah, I think that's a cool thing.
And that is basically opening up a whole new level of access to something that was previously only available to the vendors.
Now, and that's what Sick Deals did, and that's what TCG Player did in a way, And what I'm trying to say here is, like, I want to give people a broader view of what Magic Finance is and what it could be. Now, I guess I have a soft spot for those people who are out there who say, hey, I want to start a business, or I want to be a vendor, or I want to, like, own a shop, or this kind of stuff, because that was me years ago, right? So, like, I was just a player, I was just a player too. And the whole reason I got into trading and even doing this stuff was so I can afford, legacy cards, because I wanted to play Legacy. And back then, I thought they were expensive. It was like $35 for a dual land, which, know. So I got into that because of my love for the game, right? But eventually, I went from a player to a vendor, right? I owned legitmtg.com for a couple of years. I started it from essentially nothing, and then marketed it, built a brand. We had a Pro Tour team. We were like the site was growing, and then eventually I sold it. And so, like, I want players to know, hey, if you're a player, you're interested in doing this, you can do it. Okay, you can become the buy list. You can market yourself well, and you can make a consistent margin. You don't have to go and say, now, things you're talking about with arbitrage and those kind of things, those are consistent, right? Like you said, it's backed by a buy list. So if you buy it, as long as it gets to the US in time before the buy list changes, right, then you're good, right? And don't forget, you're racing all the other guys, right? All those other guys who are buying, in Europe or Japan, like, you're racing them, because once they get their orders into those buy lists are probably going to change. So is if you can do that, yeah, that's like a sure thing. But at the same time, to be fair, when you buy cards, right, you're racing other people to process them and to fight the market. I'll be fair there. But what I'll say is in my experience, even as a player, because players can buy collections, and I think they should, and I think they can. My experience is you can put the time in. You can market yourself even in a small way among your group of friends. That guy who has 50 followers. Hey man, become the guy, right? And if you have 50 followers, the time that you probably spend doing this is probably, it's scalable, right? It scales. Like, you have 50 followers, you're probably doing this. The amount of profit that you're going to gain out of it is like equal to the amount of effort you've put into your Twitter or your Facebook or whatever. So when we start looking at that micro transaction, right? That guy, he puts in $100 and buys a collection, or he puts in $100 and speculates on something. The amount of profit is going to be pretty, like, either way, it's like whatever, right? So as it scales,
that's the point I'm making. Right. You made two major points there. One was that it's important for players to recognize that they could be vendors if they want to. I think that's true, but I also think it applies to an extremely small percentage of the market, and that there is a tremendous amount of risk. Because as any person that has operated as a vendor will be happy to explain, I'm sure yourself included, running a business is not about, buying and selling Magic cards at the right percentage, so much as it is about managing the overall expense profile.
Running a business.
So negotiating your lease and managing your staff and having strong HR policy and, marketing your F&M nights and et cetera in your local market. There's a lot going on there. And I think it requires a much greater level of commitment than the average player who already has a day job is really going to be interested in pursuing, which is why at MTG Price, we're much more focused on, okay, you are a player or a grinder or a backpack speculator. You are the majority of the addressable market for this subject matter. So here's what we think will best work for you. And so to your second point about, if they put $100 into a collection or $100 into a spec, I don't think it's even close. I would argue, we're going to be publishing all the specs I've made in the last 6 months on MTG Fast Finance shortly. And that's going to be a number that is going to be hard to beat.
Wait. Let's be clear, though. If they put in $100, not if you, right?
Yeah, but the whole idea here is that the content creators are guiding that action. We're not talking about naked speculation where their average player goes, hey, what if this card's suddenly going to be good in standard? We're talking about those people plugging into content creators like ourselves and working from within that guidance to get better returns.
Right, and I'm not plugging anybody into anything, you know what I mean? Like, my view is I want people to think, I want people to see, I want to create a vision, and I want them to think and go and do, I don't want them to come back to me. I mean, hey, I don't mind, guys. Like, you guys ask me questions on Twitter, you DM me, this kind of stuff. I don't mind. I'll be happy to answer. I'm happy to give some kind of guidance, stuff like that. That's fine. But what I'm saying is, like, the better thing is if you use the stuff that I'm sharing with you guys and you critically think about your stuff and you move yourself forward, okay? Now, I'm not trying to plug you into me. Like, I don't care if you get your information or if you don't, if you do or do not, And so, like, when I share something on Twitter, I want to, like I said, I want to communicate something, get people thinking, and then allow them to see how that sits in their life. And I'm okay with you disagreeing with me. If you disagree, that's fine. Like, I don't think that you can prove it otherwise. Like, you will say, I have these numbers, but we don't have the numbers of the people who are executing at the highest levels. So we can't compare your numbers to the best numbers, right?
Sure, but I think the argument that Paul was making on Twitter is that if we're talking about what does Star City Games do sum total and what is their ROI, it not only is that so far removed from what the average player can plug into or to accomplish, but it's also a very complex and diverse group of activities where their buy list might not be their strongest ROI. Their tournament series is probably one of their lower ones, right? Because there's a lot of expenses in running the SCG Tour. But it has brand building and marketing benefits that are difficult to establish with facts and figures. It's more about long-term brand building that has to be approximated in terms of what the impact is for them as a business as a whole.
I
So
think it does build brand, but like, let's be honest. Like, I think part of the reason they do the series is so they can buy cards.
sure,
Like,
that too.
one of the things they have going for them is, so here's like a, if you think of it from like a business perspective, and you have a store, right? Like Star City Games has a store in Roanoke, right? Now, if they're thinking, hey, should we open a second store, right? Then when you open a second store, you get all kinds of problems, okay? Because like the first store has plenty of problems to start with. Okay, I'm not even like, we won't even go there. That's another topic. But you open the first store, then you say, let's open a second store. Okay, so you have a second store that you open. Now you have to hire a second staff, right? Which is probably maybe not as good as the first staff who's you've trained and like you have gone through all the things with, and it adds expenses, etc., etc. So like the way to get around that is just make one staff that travels to different locations, right? So like if you could just travel all over the United States and just buy cards every weekend, like that would be good, right? If there was a GP every weekend, that would be good. So I think that's part of where the tournament series kind of some of the business roots of the tournament series is acquisitions. It's
Sure.
like let's set up a shop here with a staff that we know that we've trained. It's like number one staff, top rate. We're gonna drop them here. Boom! They're gonna suck all the cards out of the local area. And you ask players, right? We talk to players all the time, you and I. When are they thinking about selling cards? Well, at the next Star City, I'm gonna
Sure.
go dump. I'm gonna go dump and you too. Oh, when something comes, well, I'm gonna go and drop my specs, or I'm gonna go and because it's better than shipping, and so it's just like a big vacuum cleaner in those cities. Get all the cards. So yeah, marketing, sure. Selling cards, maybe. But like really, they're there for acquisitions, in my
Yeah,
opinion.
and
Yeah.
I'm fully aware of that. My point still stands, which is that they have a lot of different revenue generating activities.
Mm-hmm.
Buylist is one of them. But the power of their retail operation and their marketing profile is what allows them to achieve turnover that maximizes the return from those buy lists.
Mm-hmm.
And yet, even still, I would assert that it is very unlikely that the annualized return on buy list is likely to be better for the average player, which is, again, who we should be speaking to. Even if Star City could say to us, we actually have on, we turn over so quickly that our annualized return on buy list is 400%. That would be a really impressive number. But it's not something that the average player can achieve. And if the argument is that, well, you could become a vendor and then work your way towards that, that's fine. That's one opportunity. But again, most players aren't going to do that. And instead, we would say you're much better off, and it's going to take much lower overall effort and overhead to look at these other strategies. For instance, EU arbitrage, or if you want something closer to home, paying attention to a diverse portfolio of voices in the community, pros, content creators, etc., keeping on top of what's happening in the Magic ecosystem, and then speculating tactically. And we are seeing those returns. I mean, if you were inside the Pro Trader Discord, and we still have to
I'm not there yet.
get you in there, you'll see for yourself that the kind of information that's being shared, the ideas and strategies that are being shared are extremely effective. And we have a testimonials thread in there where people that have been in there for a week or two are encouraged to tell us what's working. And without fail, people are seeing spectacularly better results than they saw in anything else they tried.
I think that I would never knock that, right? I would never say like no, it's not, it's not true, they're not seeing returns, I think that it's really good for an average player to get connected with a bunch of people like yourself who've been doing this for a long time and who can guide them on what things to spec on and what things not to spec on. Okay, and I'm not saying that speculation as a whole is a bad thing. People enjoy it. They make money doing it. I'm not saying there's no money in speculation, but as I said on Twitter earlier, speculation doesn't feed the children. You know what I mean? Like, if I have a choice between spending $10,000 on a collection and moving that collection through my channels to get my return, or putting $10,000 in speculations and waiting until maybe then I'm going to put that money in the return, in the hopper, and I'm going to get my paycheck. I'm not going to go and put it, on stuff that might, and then hope. And then the thing about speculation, as you know, is like you have to time it. It's a timing thing. Like you'll be sitting on stuff just looking at it and being like, I know it's coming. I don't know when, but it's almost there, and that doesn't pay the bills. At the end of the day, I just put that stuff in the channels, boom, they're gone, paycheck comes, and then I rinse and repeat, do it again, and
so I think it's important to define the difference between naked speculation and informed speculation.
Okay.
Most of the speculation that we discuss in the pro trader forums is about, or in the Discord, hinges on the theory that I developed a few years ago that is not necessarily unique to me. It's putting a frame around, I think, things that many of us understood instinctively anyway. But we call it the tipping point thesis, which is basically just that a card with a very strong demand profile that's good in multiple formats, that is out of print and heavily drained in terms of inventory, and has a steep price ladder with a low inventory profile, is going to be something that can reliably beat the kind of returns you would get from a buy list activity consistently. So it's not about saying this random $2 card might one day be worth $8 and then waiting 4 years as it rots in your box of shame. It's about finding things that the Magic community has already established as being important cards that they are going to buy. Mm-hmm. And waiting until the point where you can still get them cheap, but you can see where the card is headed because the price ladder is so steep. So, for instance, you're in a situation where you have a mythic foil. It's been out of print for 2 years. There are 10 listings left on TCG Player. The first 6 listings are at $10, and then it jumps to $25. That would be the kind of the key spec, profile that we would go after. Mm-hmm. Because you can see that if you bite off the last 20 copies, then the market will now test a new plateau.
Sure.
And that strategy has been extremely effective. And the reason it's effective is, unlike the kinds of things people have tried to do where they try to buy out a card in very, very large volume, they try to set the trend themselves.
Right. That's bad.
By, say, going after a card that has 200 copies deep. So it'd be kind of like saying, like, Ultimate Masters is out, Cavern of Souls is in the set, I'm going to throw $100,000 at it and try to buy out TCG.
Right.
Will that be effective? Well, that's a card with a really strong demand profile, but right at the start of that set being released, you're going to have a lot of trouble trying to establish it at a new plateau because boxes are still being opened. And so inventory is going to flood into the market and undercut your price. And you're going to get caught holding a lot of inventory for a long time as you struggle to try to set that new plateau. It's much more effective to play janitor than to try to set the trend. If you wait until the market has already defined what's going to happen with a card and you're just coming in to clean up at the last moment, that's been very effective. And my argument is that will be reliably effective and give better returns than being on the buying side of a buy list.
I agree that it is effective to do it that way, right? That's what you should always have been doing, is just buying the cards that the demand is already there. And I like that you call it a tipping point, but you do see where the price is starting to break, right? The market is starting to to raise the price, and so that makes sense to me. But the point I was making is that you don't know when that tipping point is going to happen. Now, you will buy it, right? And it will happen, but you can't be sure when, because you said the market is going to test the new plateau, right? So we don't know where the market's going to settle, when it's going to settle, or what that plateau is going to be. Now, you have like a good indication of that because, like, you're skilled. I have said that, But if you're talking about like an average player, we can like we can switch it around on you and say, well, you're not the average player either, like there's a very small amount of people who can start a business, market it, and do this. Well, there's a small amount of people who can do what you do, right? And so,
sure. But what I'm advancing here is that expecting that player to nakedly innovate their own ideas about what to speculate on is not the right approach. And in fact, should not be the right approach for most players for months or years from the date where they choose to focus on MTG finance.
I agree with that.
Because, and I made those same mistakes. When I first started speculating in 2014, most of what is in my box of shame is still from that same 3-month period where I first started trying to be innovative, picking cards that might be good in standard, right? Like one of the classic mistakes that a speculator will make is trying to have a new idea. And one of the things we tell pro traders all the time is it's not important at all to be original. It doesn't matter whether the spec comes from John or it comes from DJ or it comes from Corbin or it comes from Jason
right.
or Stu, whoever. What matters is whether the logic behind that and the tipping point analysis holds up. So when you said that, you don't know that the spec is going to successfully test the new plateau, one of the things that makes sure that it does is the mechanics behind how buy lists actually work, right? Mm-hmm. The buy lists at most of the major vendors respond to an acceleration of sales. If they sell out of a card, they're going to raise their buy list to get more of it.
Sometimes, yeah.
And so most of the time, so if you were correct in your analysis about whether the card's play pattern is strong mm-hmm. and why the market suddenly faces demand. So for instance, a great example would be Serum Powder and the London Mulligan rule, right? If you are on top of what's happening in competitive Magic and you're aware of the London Mulligan rule and you're following the content from the Frank Carsons of the world that talks about how your percentage of success in your opening hand with a combo deck is affected by making use of Gemstone Caverns and or Serum Powder.
Right.
And you know that mulligan is going to be tested at Pro Tour London, then you can be ahead of the curve in establishing that this card Serum Powder that was fringe in Modern up until this point is going to take off and test a new plateau. And if I look at the price wall for it, it's on a very steep curve. It's going from $3 up to $9, and there's very little inventory left. I can safely move in on that card with better returns than I would get by trying to, say, buy a collection this weekend.
Totally. And I'm not disagreeing with any of that. We're just talking about, and I think it's good. Like, I'm not trying to, not talk about this. I think it's fine to talk about, because the people watching, maybe this is a new way to understand speculation for you, and that's great. And if you want more of that stuff, you should follow James, or you should get into the Pro Trader, Discord, and kind of see the things that they hash out and stuff like that. So, like, I don't disagree with any of that stuff. What I'm saying is, I guess, if I can sum it up, I think that it's silly to me to say that buy listing is inferior to this way of doing business, this speculative way, because the buy list guys are the ones paying your paycheck, because, like, you're taking it to us, we're buying it. Like, where did that money come from?
I'm not sure I understand. I agree with the fundamentals of that logic.
Sure.
I can easily be getting the better end of that deal. The way I look at that is that I'm feeding off of a strategy that I don't want any part of, because I know my side of the deal is better. If I'm snapping up 50 or 100 copies of Smothering Tide at $2 a piece in Europe, and then buy listing them to CK this week at $9 a month later, you can't tell me that that them picking up at $9 and flipping it at $11 is the superior strategy.
Yeah, but what I can tell you is that they have the money to buy it.
Sure.
They have the money to buy your stuff at
$9. Just because they have a large revenue, we don't know what their end profit margin is. So I can't actually argue that the strategies I'm advancing are better sum total. Yeah. If we're talking at scale, like if we're talking about what is better at $5 million, is it better if you've got $5 million to start a vendor operation or a speculative operation? I can't definitively answer that question because it hasn't been tested and I don't have the math. Right. But I can tell you that for a player perspective, if you're operating at $500, $1,000, $5,000 a year, that is either your money you spend on Magic and you want to get your collection more cheaply, or your play speculative money in your high risk investment category for your personal finances, then you are probably going to get better returns from well-informed speculation than you ever would from buying collections.
Okay, I hear that. Now, I'd like to. I think we're getting to the point where we've kind of like we both said a bunch of stuff, and I think it was all good stuff. I think it's good information. I'm not convinced by your side of the argument. I think you make good points, but again, I'm not convinced because I think there's missing data, and I think best is subjective, right? Because like what's best for me in my lifestyle is not what you're talking about. What's best for me is that sure paycheck, right? What's best for a common player, that's something that could be argued, but like again, that's a subjective thing because like, my tweet didn't say common player, it didn't say vendor, it didn't say anything. It just said best, right? So like we can apply that however you
Sure.
want. And you said
Yeah, and
I
I think
disagree.
fair
You
point.
said
And best for you is different than best for everyone, for sure.
right.
However, I would argue that what you are really saying when you claim best for you even is an assessment of risk. You've indicated a few different times in this conversation that the thing about speculation is it's not certain. You've indicated that you feel that the Buylist methodology provides less risk.
It does.
And what I'm saying is that were you to be plugged into a stream of information that was more in tune with tightly executed speculation or cross-border arbitrage,
but
you might end up changing your mind.
Do you think I don't get that kind of information though, James? Like, do you think I don't have that information constantly coming through my direct messages and my inboxes and stuff like that, or in conversations with some of these vendors and these people that I'm consulting with and whatnot? Like, I have the information,
I can't argue with your day to day. I have no access to that information at all.
No,
all I'm saying is that if you were executing on it and comparing the results, so I mean, what about this? If you were to take $1,000 of your operational budget, and buy
I like where this is going. Go ahead.
And you're going to buy a collection, and you're going to take another $1,000 and invest it in things I told you to, and compare the results within a 3-month period, which do you think would do better?
I think the collection would do better, like I said in the thing, and this is why. It's because by the time I was selling the spec, I would have already bought another collection. I would have moved the first stuff, bought another. So like when you do that, when you compound that, right? So let's say you buy $100 of cards, you sell it for $150 in cards. You buy $150 in cards, you sell it for $200 or $250. Like the math is all messed up on that. But like you get the idea. It's like by the time, because of the turnover, by the time you get to the spec, then you've already compounded your money. So like, to me, like that's like, like I said, it's simple math at that point. It's not.
Sure, but I would argue that you cannot roll over collections any faster than I can roll over a spec.
It depends on your channels. It really does. And what I'll say is this, is also you're not always right.
No, definitely not
always right.
That's absolutely true.
And so when you miss,
anybody who tells you they're always right is obviously wrong.
Right. And this is part of why I'm having the conversation, because I want to be more, I want to understand your side more, and I think I do, and I always respect your opinion, right? And so like I think that I get to hear a little bit more in depth of what you're saying. Everyone else gets to hear it too, and so why don't you make some final points, and then let's open up to questions. Let's see what the.
So are you game to let me control $1,000 of your operational budget and put it neck and neck in your own spreadsheets?
Can I think about it?
Of course.
All right, I think that would be a fun experiment. Okay? So those of you in the audience, we're gonna break the fourth wall here. What do you think about that kind of thing? Should I give James $1,000 of my money? What do you think about that? And also, do you have questions for us? Let's answer some questions. And I think this has been super informative. So I'd like to hear where your guys are at, and then we can maybe jump off of whatever those are. So I'll wait here on the chat. Let me read some of the chat while we're waiting for questions to come in.
Go for it.
And let's see what, man, this is a long chat. Let's see if there's some stuff in there. So my friend Ben says, "Oh, it's a private message, but I think I could read it with everyone being fine. This is probably the single greatest discussion I can remember hearing in Magic Finance." Thank you, Ben. I think 1K at Specs beats collections. Okay, so Amar says, this is James Billing says, 1K in Specs beats collections. That's isn't it.
So let me give you an example of a forthcoming opportunity that is available to pretty much every Magic player should they have the funds available to invest.
Uh-huh.
Next week, probably Friday, we're going to get an announcement that Mythic Edition 3 is forthcoming.
Right.
And my guess is that that set is probably something like the 3 Mythic Planeswalkers from War of the Spark, so Liliana, Bolas, and Gideon, plus maybe Jace the Mind Sculptor and Ugin, original Ugin, plus a few. If it's anything like that, so as good as Mythic Edition 1 was and better than Mythic Edition 2, Mythic Edition 1 was a less than 1 month flip from less than $300 to $600 minus fees. Would you not agree that if that plays out like that, that is likely to beat anything you could do on Buylist with the same amount of capital in the same time frame?
Right, but I would just buy that. Like, to me, like, that's not speculation. You know what I mean? Like, that's just, you just buy those things, you know?
Sure, but that's the kind of speculative activity we're talking about.
Yeah, but you call that speculative, but like a lot of times once the first time that hits the market, it's already selling higher than the MSRP or whatever. So like that's like a fact, right? It's like saying, hey, if you could buy from the vault at the MSRP, would you do it? It's like, yeah, because the MSRP is $35 and from the vaults always go for like at least 60, you know, up to like, you know, 150, you know, so like, you know, it's the same thing with the Mythic Edition. It's never going to be, that thing is never going to, well, they have to really work hard to make it less than the MSRP. Let's just put it that way.
So let's say that we agree that in the scenario we're discussing, it is a great set and will, say, get at least to $500. Mm-hmm. Would you not then agree that all of your funds that week should be directed to that and not to buying collections?
I think we should do both. I think we should.
Well, but you have a finite amount of money, and last time they sold Mythic Edition 2 on eBay, you could basically buy infinite amount. They were shipping 20.
Yeah, that was that. They fixed that right away though.
Let's assume that it's still possible because you can set up multiple accounts.
Okay. Yeah. Well, so, that's okay.
And let's say that the average player only has $300 to spend that week. Would you advocate that they buy Mythic Edition or a collection?
Again, we go back to average player versus everyone, right? And like, to me, I think average player, it's always great for them to buy a box because like, sure, like they could buy the Mythic Edition box, they could sell those packs, the Planeswalker packs, for over the cost that they paid and still open a box and whatever, you know? So like for an average player, sure, you know? For a vendor, I say do both because they have the money, you know? If a vendor doesn't have the money, then, you know, that's something else. That's, you know,
if we're talking about Star City Games level revenue, I mean, money is a whole different thing. They're not going to interrupt their buy listing operation to focus on Mythic Edition.
Right.
Let's talk about, you know, a small town store that typically spends, say, $5,000 a week on buy list or something.
Uh-huh.
The argument I would advance is that in that given week, if they can only buy $5,000 worth of stuff, it's really better to suspend their buy list and spend on nothing but Mythic Edition and circle back the week after.
Is it better? See, because better is another question, right? This is why this conversation exists, is because better, if you're talking about ROI, that's a different discussion. Then I don't think it's better for a store to say, oh, sorry, dude, we're not buying cards this week because we're buying, you know, Mythic Edition.
Because you could push them to the store down the street and they might permanently bring their buy list there.
And also they just like get that bad taste in their mouth. And also you might be out of stock and maybe you need to buy cards because you need to stock Smothering Tides because, you know, the command zone spiked them, you know, or whatever. You know, so that's like a better is just like, you know, sometimes you have to do things for survival in business. And that's better. Survival is better than ROI because you won't live to see the ROI, you know?
There's definitely some nuance there for sure. And it would depend on the store, and it's more complex than I outlined it to be.
Right.
Sure.
But again, when you're saying an average player, sure. Like if you have $500, okay, should you buy a collection or should you buy Mythic Edition? I think that sight unseen, the Mythic Edition has the track record, okay, to me. So like you want to go with the track record because the collection, you're not sure. Okay, and again, it comes back to skill, right? Because like if you're unskilled at buying collections, then buying $500 in a collection is maybe not the best thing for you to do. There was some people who were asking me the other day, "Hey, should I buy cards at these rates?" And I was like, "Whoa, like you should not pay those rates for cards because like when you start looking at expenses and I start breaking down expenses for them and they're like, whoa, what's going on here? Then I tell them that's bad. Don't do that. So yeah, if you're unskilled, okay, yeah, you might just set your money on fire. But then again, it comes back to my style, right? Because it's like, hey, Mythic Edition has a proven track record. Okay, do the thing with the track record. Do the thing that's going to pay you. Don't go and like bet on a collection, But for someone who's skilled at buying collections, to me, it's like, yeah, like I could see collections, and I'm not trying to toot my own horn, but like I could see a picture on Craigslist and be like, that's probably worth X money, Like I'd be happy to buy that for that number, that kind of stuff. So I don't know. Should we take some questions, James?
Go for it.
Okay, let's take a look. I see some stuff happening in the chat, so. Oh man, so much chat. Thank you for all the chat love, everybody. Appreciate it. We have a lot of questions, so let's try to jump in. You should give me $10,000. Hey, if you have $10,000 in cards, I would happily give you $10,000 in cash. So, just for everybody who's asking, if you want money from me, just hit me up with a list of cards you have, and I will give you money. Spreadsheet contest, collections are wild cards. One thing that, to be fair, guys, that I did not say about buying collections, and this is something you should know, condition. That's something that can really eat into your collection profits. And so, like, that's something I also just say buy a collection, right? But if you buy a collection at Buylist, but then all the condition is trash, then your returns are going to get eaten up in that. So that's also a risk you take with collections. Question for James. Here we go. How much of your spec profit do you attribute to other speckers hearing your specs and moving on them, bringing those prices up? So this is a question I think you're going to love to answer, right?
Yeah, that's bread and butter for me. Because it ties into the presumption that exists, I think, with the average Magic player who isn't tuned into MTG Finance, that what MTG Finance is really about is pump and dump. That it's the idea that you are falsely suggesting a card is in high demand and then telling a bunch of people to buy it, which artificially sets up a new plateau. And the problem with that argument is that it doesn't recognize how the dynamics of the Magic economy actually play out. If you try to pump a card that does not have a commensurate demand profile, it will not work. Because though you may be able to set the price momentarily, if the rest of the market is willing to sell, it will continuously undercut your price until the card comes back into equilibrium with the actual demand profile of the card. So say you have 20 copies of a card at $15 and you buy them all up and you post a single copy, only person available on the globe with that copy at $40. Somebody has to decide that they want to pay $40 for that card before you are proven correct. And you're only proven correct on that copy. You then have to demonstrably repeat that process without the market undercutting your price on a consistent basis and get out in the time frame that you want to get out. And so typically what ends up happening is the more that your play is based on your own idea and not the market reality, the weaker your play is going to be. And where that leads the smart money is to not try to set trends. Trying to pump and dump stuff or trying to buy out cards that are not demand back is going to be a losing proposition more often than not. So it is much safer, much smarter to go after specs where the demand is going to unfurl naturally. So a good example of that would be something like Mox Amber. Again, in February, we identified that War of the Spark was probably about Planeswalkers and managed to confirm that. And so Mox Amber became an obvious speculation target. We bought a bunch of them and sold them to real people at a higher price. People started evaluating the card as a 4 of Mythic in Standard, and it hit that $15 to $20 price point you would expect for a card that was expected to see play. Now, to date, it has not actually seen play, but the smart money is already out on the card.
Right. You should probably not, if you already bought them, you should not be holding them. You should have sold them weeks ago.
Yeah, I
So,
mean, most of that, when people got their first taste of what was going to be in War of the Spark, that's when the card took off. When the broader Magic public understood that War of the Spark was a Planeswalker set, and people started talking about Mox Amber as a card they might need for their standard decks, that's where most of us were selling. And so, does a content creator have the power to draw attention to a card and sell some cardboard? Absolutely. I can do it to some small degree. Someone like Saffron Olive or Command Zone, they move a lot more cardboard than anybody in the MTG finance sphere. If Saffron runs a funky deck that people latch onto, that's going to sell some cards. If Command Zone calls out Paradox Engine as a must include or Smothering Tithe as a must include, that's stuff we pay attention to because that moves cardboard. So the ability to attempt to influence people is there for content creators, but responsible content creators try to guide people towards the stuff that the rest of the community already wants to own.
right. I think that's a good answer. And like he says, the market is not going to bear what the market won't bear. The market, if the market is paying it, then the market's paying it. I will say that people are more like speculative minded because there's been so many years of Magic Finance content, and it's kind of got into the DNA of the regular player. And so there's a lot of focus, I think almost too much. I think players would be happier sometimes to just not think so much about that stuff and enjoy the game more. But that's a whole nother topic. So we have some more questions.
I will just to make a quick point there. I will definitely say that the more you focus on the finance side, depending on how much spare time you've got, you are eating into the parts of the game that are the most fun.
Right.
Playing, collecting, designing decks is the most fun way to experience Magic.
I agree with that wholeheartedly. And spending time with your friends, around a command.
The social aspects of Magic far outrank finance. So if you've only got time for one, go the fun route.
Right. Or make a bunch of Magic Finance friends. Then you get to do both. No, I'm just joking. Well, I mean, that's, So,
and arguably that's what the Pro Trader community is all about. I mean, for $5 a month, our people are getting excellent advice, killer spec guidance, and they're also buying and selling cards from each other, so they're getting a lot of advantage there. We're linking people from Europe and Japan and North America, and people are also just making friends and having fun.
Okay. So we have some more questions. Let's jump in, and we'll put a link to the MTG price. It's mtgprice.com. That's where you can sign up to Pro Trader. I do want to plug that out there just for people who would be interested and who, if you're hearing James and he's talking about these things, I'm not sponsored or anything by MTG Price or anything like that. As he said, he can't even convince me to join the Discord, but I do respect James, and I think that joining that for an average player is something that's a good thing. So, in $5 a month, I think, you'll probably get much more of your money back than the $5.
I'll put it this way: if you know a Pro Trader, ask a Pro Trader whether they're getting their money's worth, and the answer will be pretty clear.
Right. And so a couple more questions here. Why pistachio ice cream? So pistachio ice cream was an ice cream that my dad really likes.
That's a great flavor.
What's that?
We're in sync. That's a great flavor.
Yeah, see, we agree. We agree. I think we could stop the cast now. But yeah, my dad really liked that ice cream, and it was something that we couldn't get often for some reason. I don't know why. It just wasn't always available. So when you get it, you're like, oh man, this is great. So if you haven't had pistachio ice cream, you should do that. Put that on the list with signing up for Pro Trader.
Put pistachio first.
Yeah.
And while you're eating it, log on to Pro Trader.
Yeah, and that sounds like a really good time. How would an unskilled person start out beginning to learn Magic Finance? Well, again, I'm not trying to plug the Pro Trader stuff, but like reading the articles from the guys who have been at this for a long time, talking in Discord, I think that talking with people on Twitter is a really great way too. Like, connecting with, like James was saying, connect with a bunch of people who have influence on Twitter, and listen to what they're talking about. And then I would say it's, trial and error. Start to test your metal. Try to buy a collection. Try to make a spec. Do it with little bits of money. Don't do it with lots of money at first. Yeah. Start out small. Read a lot of information. Try to consume as much info as possible, and then ask people who are. I know James and I. We field questions all the time. So feel free to ask. And
hundreds per week on Twitter alone. I think one of the key points you made there was close your wallet. Do not try to go deep fast. As with any investment activity, you want to start real slow. In fact, it's probably best to make phantom specs in a spreadsheet. We give all of our new pro traders a speculation tracking spreadsheet because we're rebuilding all of our back-end pro trader tools this year. So while those are waiting to relaunch, we have given people some frameworks to use to kind of manage their activities. And the best thing you can do is plug into all of the best content sources. So follow me, follow John, Brainstorm Brewery, Quiet Speculation, the guys on TCG Player, Chaz over at SCG. Get plugged in, consume information, and then make sure that you're also following Magic Pros. The most innovative deck builders are going to give you a lot of great information. What is Command Zone featuring on their latest YouTube episode that's going to get 300,000 views matters a lot more than whatever I say every week.
Also, it's like, just if I could plug the Command Zone, it's really great watching material. Like just watching their podcast, watching game nights, those are like highlights of my YouTube consumption. So like you should definitely follow Command Zone and or Command Cast on
at the risk of alienating some listeners, I will, and we've tried to keep this really positive. There is one piece of shade I will throw.
Uh-oh.
Rudy and Alpha Investments is not where you should be getting your MTG planning. That gentleman is about entertainment and self-interest. And as someone who analyzed that content for a reasonably long period of time, I can say that it has probably caused more it has limited people's access to great information more often than it has provided benefit. But treat that channel, if you are into consuming it, as entertainment first, and get your strong MTG finance info from another source.
So yes, I will say, let me just say, without like agreeing with what you said, because I don't want to throw any shade, but what I will say is that people listen to Rudy. Whether they should or shouldn't is another situation, but like you should be aware of the meta there, okay? Because there's meta happening where it's like they listen to him, so knowing what he says is interesting because people are listening. Just like anybody, people are listening to James, so like knowing what he says is meta, right? Now I happen to respect James and what he says, so it's also good to know that. But sometimes there's people that I listen to because I know that people are listening to them,
and
not
every
because
content creator carries a bias.
What's that?
Whether it's for the, every content creator carries a bias, whether it's for the site that they write for or they're working with, or based on their own focus. Like Sig is always focused on reserved list, so his advice on reserved list and working Buylist arbitrage on reserved list cards is going to be very strong. His ability to say direct you to the latest commander spec is probably going to lag the market. Mm-hmm. And all of us have strengths and weaknesses in that way.
Jason Alt is another one for Commander, right?
Right. So Jason is a very well-established content creator on multiple platforms, including writing for MTG Price. And his series on Commander topics, he was way ahead of the curve. When most MTG Finance people were saying that Commander was never going to sell, was not important to MTG Finance because, quote-unquote, Commander players wouldn't buy foils or whatever. Jason was way out ahead of that, recognizing that though the format was only single copy per deck, people were building a lot of decks.
Yeah.
And that's really what matters, right? It's like, it's not that Smothering Tide isn't taking off because you buy 4 to play in your Commander deck. It's taking off because you might have 6 white Commander decks and they all need a Smothering Tide because it's so annoying to port cards back and forth. And so, one of the other things you can do as a player that's starting out is to stay in your lane in terms of what your interests are. So if you're a Commander player, you're probably going to do better focusing on Commander specs. If you're a really good, accomplished Modern or Legacy player, you're probably going to do better trying to evaluate specs that are in the format where you spend the most time. And so recognizing what your limitations are and leaning into your strengths is going to be a good way to go.
I like that last point you made, and if I can tie that to like collection buying and whatnot, because I like to talk about that. Being a player, a Commander player or a Modern player, you're going to have access to people who want to sell those cards first, right? Because if you establish yourself as a buyer, then your commander buddies are going to be like, oh, you're buying, like I was going to ship some of this stuff from my Atraxa deck or my mono greens whatever deck, and would you like to buy them, or hey, I'm trying to get out of this modern deck so I can get into Amulet Titan, are you buying, those kind of things. You're going to have access to those players because you're going to be playing that format, and if you establish yourself that way. So there's a couple more questions. What I'll do is, hey, if you have a question, at me, say at Medina Streams, and then put the question, because the chat's going nuts and it's hard for me to follow what the actual questions are, and then we get this boring second where I'm like looking through stuff, and then James has to fill the air with a bunch of stuff he has to say, which none of us really want to hear. So like but okay, so here's the other question that I thought was really good. Some people are like blowing leaves outside my window, so sorry about that. What do you believe are the next steps in technology, the technology side of MTG Finance? Are there any good applications? Currently, TCG Player is easily replaceable given someone creates better tools. So I would say, let me first say to the last part, I just want to jump in there with like a quick shot. That's not easily replaceable.
No, it's not. I started a collectible, basically TCG Player-ish, for all the other collectibles. So like one of my businesses is shelflife.net, which is a next generation social commerce platform for collectibles. And the premise there was that you can, we have a Wikipedia style encyclopedic listing of every collectible ever made, tracked all the way down to the parts level. So for instance, if somebody needs an Optimus Prime Generation 1 1984 gun, and we know that that appeared in 2 different versions of the toy, we can connect the buyer and seller automatically. Let me tell you, building large-scale platforms like that is not trivial. And somebody with a lot of money can always enter into any given marketplace and challenge an incumbent. But there are major roadblocks or moats, financial and technical and operational, that are between you and that goal. I would also argue that TCG Player does a fairly good job of innovating and iterating. And I don't think you're going to see them disrupted in their market anytime soon. They compete directly head-to-head with eBay. You can see that in the way that coupons are reflected on both sites. In Europe, you're talking about Magic Card Market. And, outside of those platforms, I don't think you're going to see a major platform launch anytime soon.
If I could add to the TCG Player side stuff, first of all, you have to fight their marketing momentum. So they've built up years of marketing momentum. They've cemented themselves in the minds of players everywhere. They've really done that, and not only that, they've also got an influx of cash. It was $10 million was granted to them by investors because of how good they are. They were rated like #1 place to work in New York or something like that. Like, this company is like no joke. TCG Player has come to game, and they do things very well. So I don't think it's something easily replaceable, but let's talk about tools, because I think there's a lot of room for growth for tools on, especially for me, as consulting with different vendors, consulting with LGSs, doing my own thing, which I've bought and sold and had, Crystal Commerce, which I've used for legit MTG when I own legit. So I think there's a lot of room to grow there. I'd love to hear James's thoughts before I start talking about that.
Probably one of the more notable things for vendors has been the advent of the QS Ion scanner and the similar technology on offer from TCG Player, right? The ability to use a camera to log inventory quickly is a pretty big deal. We also saw a few months back, there was a story about a company that had created like a giant vending machine where you could feed in collections and it would catalog the inventory really quickly. I haven't seen to what extent whether that has actually come to market. I haven't followed up on that to see whether that device has actually made it to Star City or anything and that they're testing or using it. But I suspect that for the mid to large vendors, that will probably become a thing. The ability to not hand parse collections will really save them a lot of money on the operational side, so long as that machine doesn't damage cards while it's processing them, which is the big question mark in my mind.
Right, and the accuracy of the machine. So the part of the problem is grading. So you can pre-grade, right? So you say everything in this stack is near mint, push it through the machine, and then hopefully it doesn't make them not near mint, but you push it through the machine and then it will catalog it. But I don't see a machine that's going to grade it. So you still need a grade, right? But I would agree that something that automates input process, because like part of the problem, okay, we do a lot of acquisitions, right? And I dump a lot of cards on, business partners and stuff like that. Here's a bunch of cards, like, there you go. Well, they have to process that stuff. And a lot of the bottleneck is just processing. A lot of times what they'll do is they'll say, all right, everything $5 and up, put it separate so that we can process that first. And then all that other stuff just sits in a box until like their staff can get to it. And since we're dumping so much cards, it's just like $5 and up, $5 and up, and then these boxes just start to like queue up, So go ahead.
And whether you're a TCG player or you're your operation,
right?
Not the bylist margin that is the tricky part of the equation, right? Like that's
right.
relatively easy to manage.
Yeah.
It's that operational side. It's
sure.
how much can you minimize your expense profile so that your your revenue leads to profit.
Right.
So tools on the vendor side that help operationally are the most important technological advances. From a player perspective, there's already a lot of good, like decent collection management tools out there. What MTG Price is working on for later this year is going to be more about allowing people to, divide their collections up into baskets. So your personal collection versus your specs.
Oh, that's cool.
Then building some social mechanics around all of that so that people can compare how they're doing to, say, our writers or to their peers. And I think that gamifying that and then tying it into notifications so that you get notifications to your mobile device as to movement in the market that affects your collection is probably the next step out for players.
I think also in the back end for vendors, what I will say as well is some software that ties these systems together in a better way. So like there is no software that really lets you catalog a collection. So like you can use the Ion scanner, which is great. It scans. The scanning on the Ion scanner is great. Okay, so when you put the card there, it'll scan it. It'll let you pick what edition. That's awesome. But the problem with the Ion scanner is it only comes in one format. So like once you're done scanning the collection, you can import it into Trader Tools and get some numbers, but you can't import it into Crystal Commerce, right?
Sure.
And so you can upload it to their sales portal, right? But of course, like if you don't want to use their sales portal, if you want it on Crystal Commerce, there's nothing to link those two things. And there's nothing to like say, hey, I want to mark all my cards on Crystal Commerce to be the TCG player market price. Like there's nothing to do that. Like if there were tools because okay, in my tweet, going back to the tweet a little bit, I said the best way is to do this, right? But like to be honest, like a lot of these people who I'm working with, we're using composite strategies, right? Things that are like they're threaded, like there's multiple threads of what we're doing, and we have multiple channels that we're selling different things on, and stuff that can help us interoperate between those channels is not there. So we have these like spreadsheets and weird like programming things that like, do some of the job and so like something to tie all that together and let you seamlessly control your pricing and control your stocks that we put in on all platforms would be amazing. But
I mean, part of that is because the Ion scanner technology or the equivalent at TCG player is really on offer because they want you to use their inventory management system.
Right.
So if you love that inventory management system and it works for you, then you're fully in sync. But if you're looking to use one piece of their technology but not the other, then things get a little dicey. And there's still, to my mind, the inventory management software for collectibles is still not fully matured. And I think that the platform that figures that out fastest and has an end-to-end solution where it fulfills all the possible needs is going to dominate the market probably somewhere in the next 5 years.
Yeah, I think that there's plenty of money to be made there, and I think it's something that's very needed. So I would answer that way. Norbert says, "Where can I sell? How can I sell my cube? What's the best way?" Here's what I'm going to say. Send me the list, and I'll give you a quote, and I'll do my best to give you a good number. You and I go back a long way, so I could do that. There's 1,000 different buy lists you can use. So I'm not going to endorse any of those because I'm trying to buy it, But I know that I will say, Card Kingdom is usually pretty good on commander cards. So if you have commander cards in your cube, you were asking, you had some beta cards and stuff like that. The buy list for that fluctuates from different vendors. I mean, ABU used to be like paying really high on that stuff. I think they've changed. I haven't looked at their buy list for that kind of thing. Do you know where they sit on their old school stuff?
I mean, with ABU, it really depends on whether you're trying to get to cash or credit, right?
Well, yeah, their credit's insane, right?
Their credit you can basically reliably multiply by like 0.65 or 0.7 to understand what buying power it actually gives you. That's usually what I'm using when I'm buy listing to them, because that approximates the high-end cards I can get out to there that I can then turn into cash relatively quickly. If you're trying to get to cash, then that's probably not your best venue, because that particular vendor doesn't want to give you cash. That's part of their strategy. They keep cash liquid by dealing, trading cards only, or the vast majority of the time. So you could also look at Facebook groups to get rid of a cube. Tricky part is if it's a high value cube, it has to resonate with one particular person, and it might take some time to find it. Mm-hmm. So if you end up waiting 6 to 12 months to find that buyer, you might be better off just selling it to John or whoever will give you a good deal.
Right, and that's really what it comes down to when you're selling stuff is, do you want to put the work in to hustle it? Do you want to have the risk to ship it? And, there's not a lot of risk in shipping it, but there's a little bit of risk that there's probably more risk that you just get ripped off than that you get lost in the mail. So, it gets there and then someone charges you back on PayPal or something like that. The scummy kind of things like that happen. Do you want to carry that stuff, or do you want to just bring it to me and I give you some number for it, And, that's why people usually choose to do that. Also, money fast, like if someone needs cash fast, hey, that's where I get a lot of buys, because, I'll tell people, hey, sometimes it's like, I can't touch those numbers, of some certain buy list or whatever. And they're just like, yeah, but like, I need the cash right now, because I'll be like, hey, send it in, but the buy list, you send it in, they're gonna grade you on condition. So like, you're gonna get less than you sent in, right? Because, they're going to grade the condition down, and you're going to get less. And then the other thing is you have to wait. You're going to wait, however long it takes for them to process your buy. And, so some people want to do that quicker. And so that's why, I do the, I do.
And certainly one of the bigger mistakes a player can make that's looking to unload a lot of cards is to get fixated on valuing them at their composite street value. Uh-huh. It's just not a realistic number. And the more distributed that collection is to lower value cards, the more you are overvaluing it by using that strategy. So if you have 10,000 $5 cards, that is not a $50,000 collection. Right. That might be a 25,000, maybe a $30,000 collection, depending on how liquid those cards are. A big collection I bought in 2015, we estimated was worth about 20,000 US. We bought it for 14,005. I flipped it 4 months later for 23,005. Street value was like 42,000.
Yeah.
You have to be ready to take significant discounts when you're moving that volume of cardboard, because the guy I sold it to needed to have a margin that he could unload at retail price.
Right.
And I flipped it relatively quickly. It's going to take him a lot longer to flip, so his margin has to be bigger than mine.
Yeah, and the other thing you have to remember is people don't remember this, and some new financiers, when they're buying collections to sell on TCG Player or something, they don't count this stuff into their ideas. The lowest thing you sell on TCG Player is $2, right? Well, when you sell a $2 order on TCG Player, you're probably walking away with like 75 cents. And the reason why is, like, to walk in the door, it's 80 cents. It's 55 cents to ship it, and it's 30 cents for the processing fee of the credit card. That's not even talking about, TCG fees. That's talking about the shipping and the 30 cents to process the credit card. So then you have shipping materials, you have the fee from TCG Player. So at the end of the day, you end up with 70 cents when you sell a $2 card. So like if you're telling people, oh, I buy $2 cards at $1 a piece, and you're going to sell them on TCG Player, you're making a mistake, because, if somebody buys that $2 card, you've lost 30 cents. And people don't know that because they buy, a whole collection. They pay $1 on all these $2 cards. They put them all up on TCG Player. They start getting sales and they're like, it's working, And that's why those lower value cards, the percentage that gets kind of chopped out of them is a lot, because just to walk in the door to sell those cards is a big percentage. And so you got to think about that kind of thing.
And likewise, one of the things that we flag on MTG Fast Finance a lot, the podcast I do with Travis Allen for MTG Price, is, a fast mover that goes like $1 to $3, say a non-foil commander card that sees a minor spike in demand, say because of feather or whatever, is the last thing you want to be holding unless you've got a buy list exit lined up. Because to obsess over a single copy of a $1 card and try to figure out how you're going to get 3 for it is just not where you want to be. You want to be picking up, Mox Ambers at $7, whatever, and selling entire play sets for 75 at a pop, because that makes the time you're going to spend packaging and shipping that versus your hourly rate that much better. So focusing on cards under $10 is often going to be a mistake, unless, from a speculatory perspective, unless you're buying volume and you're looking to dump to a buy list.
Right, or you're doing your own TCG player shop and you're building some kind of brand or something like that. That would be another situation. But like you're saying, the feather cards, another thing with the feather cards, anything that spikes is going to start to retrace. So like, you don't want to...
Especially if it's very specific to a single inflection point for demand. We don't know yet how many feather decks are going to get built. So is Foil Defiant Strike from KTK going to hold $4? Probably not. If you bought 2,000 copies of that in Europe last week, are you going to be able to out them to buy lists? Probably not. There's a big difference between, say, Smothering Tide at $2 and a feather-specific card. Right. You'll hear Jason Alt go on about that all the time, that you don't buy the commander, you buy the card that many, many different commanders will want to play.
Right.
You don't buy the narrow spec for a single commander, you buy Smothering Tide.
Right, and I think you should sell it as soon as it just starts to warm up. To me, if you follow me on Twitter, you'll see some card spikes, and I'll put a copy on Twitter for like whatever. It was like, what was it? Sunforger. Sure. That spiked, and I sold them for like $5 on Twitter. It's like they went up to like 8 or 10 or something like that. And to me, it's like, look, I put these aside when they were 30 cents. In my box of bulk rares, and there's a box that I have that like. I pick the bulk we buy, and when the bulk rare, when it's a bulk rare that I'm going to sell for like 5 to 7 cents, and it's like Sunforger, I'm not going to sell the bulk rare for 5 to 7 cents because I'm like, well, Sunforger is not. I'm not going to bulk it. There's a whole bunch of cards like that, and so like when something like that spikes, I'll just go to that bulk box, and I will just put it up on Twitter or put it up on the TCG store or. Give it to one of my partners or something like that who I'm working with.
With those narrow specs, you get a very short window of opportunity where they're hot, and you need to get in and out in a hurry. And you typically don't want to be deep, because the buy list won't be deep. Even if the buy list jumps, ABU might only want 4 copies. So if you bought 30 or 40, you're going to have trouble finding enough buy lists to take them all off your hands, and then you've got to pack all those individual orders, etc. So yeah, all of that factors in.
Right, and for me, just as a buyer, when I'm buying stuff, if I'm buying Sunforger, I'm not buying it, at some, like, let's say it's $7 right now. On a $7 card, I might give you $4 typically, but like, I'm not gonna give you $4 on a Sunforger, because that thing just spiked and it's gonna retrace, I might give you $2 on a Sunforger, I might give you $1.50, depending. So you got to think about that kind of thing,
Yeah.
All right, so I think we're winding down. I don't see many other questions. So is there anything else you want to say before we shut the puppy down? I really appreciate this. I think this was a great exchange. I hope you agree.
Thanks for entertaining the discussion. Appreciate you going through all the nitty gritty with me, and happy to have follow up chats on this or other topics in the future.
Okay, yeah, that sounds great, man. And if you guys enjoyed this, let us know, because maybe we'll do this again sometime.
Yeah, we could also have you on to MTG Fast Finance at some point. That's the weekly finance podcast that we do for MTG Price, as I said.
Yeah.
For people that aren't aware, we basically go over the top movers of the week. We usually have 5 or 6 specs for people to take a look at. We go over the metagame week in review, which is basically going over the latest competitive Magic tournaments and evaluating them from a financial perspective. And then we usually have a topic of the week. Next week, we're going to have Daniel Fournier on, Magic Pro, to pop some bubbles for cards that we think might be good in War of the Spark. And then we'll have Jason Alt on a couple of weeks after that as our guest, talking about the best way to interpret stats on EDH Rec.
Yeah, I think those are great, great opportunities for you to listen. And I put the MTG price link in there, so make sure you get in there. Also, if you're a pro trader, you do get to listen to the Fast Finance podcast early, so that's kind of cool because you get to like tune in early and hear the cast. That's a great cast. If you want to know,
basically the pro traders get early access to all the articles written by Travis Allen, Cliff Daigle, Jason Alt, myself on MTG Price. Early 48 hours head start on the MTG Fast Finance, which usually pays for itself in a hurry just by having early access to the specs, and access to the MTG Price Pro Trader Discord. For years, the MTG Price forums were just a dead zone, never really coalesced a community there. But launching Discord a few months ago has been a massive turning point on that front. And we've got a couple hundred people in there chatting up a storm all day long. Tons of opportunities going on. Definitely worth checking out. Lately we've been offering kind of money back guarantees or free 3-day trials to people to get access to all of that, because we're very confident that once you get in the door, you'll never want to leave.
All right. And if you want to hear more from me, you could follow me here on Twitch. I do a number of things on here. I'll play like random arena games. I talk about Magic Finance, and the best way to like connect with me is Twitter. So I'm going to put that in the chat. There's a pinned link on my Twitter that has all of my like social media and other stuff that I do. I sometimes write for Cool Stuff Inc. And so that's also there.
Who's also our sponsor now?
Yeah, they're your sponsor, huh? Woo!
Yeah. Cool Stuff sponsors MTG Fast Finance these days.
That's cool. Cool
so
Stuff.
We've actually got there's a coupon people can use if they're listening. Finance 5 gives you 5% off at Cool Stuff if you don't already spend so much that you've got their 10% off discount or whatever their max is. As you're working your way up to that, Finance 5 can definitely save you some money.
That sounds great. And what I will say is, so let me give one more plug to Cool Stuff, because like they don't sponsor me. I write for them from time to time whenever I have the time to do it. But what I will say is that if you do become part of their loyalty program, a lot of times you can buy cards on Cool Stuff Inc. as cheap as TCG Player. So what I've been doing is like, because I write for them, I wrote for them, and I started shopping there because I was writing for them. I was like, oh, might as well, buy some cards from them if they have them at a good deal, right? But then as my numbers started going higher, I started saying, well, the more I pay into this, the better like my rates are, because you can save up to like 15% on singles, and so like I'm almost there to the 15%, and like so what I would recommend is if you haven't started that, use that code, buy some stuff from there with that code, and then you'll start to grow your percentage that you're going to save, and then every time you have an opportunity, check them first, because once you get to that point where it's like 15%. It's like I look at TCG Player, by the time I pay tax, like it's cheaper at Cool Stuff. And so and
if you're buying a big money card, those percentage-based discounts really start to pay off.
Right.
15% off $10, you save $1.50. But if it's $1,000 card like a Judge Foyle Gaia's Cradle or something, you're getting that for $850. That's a big deal.
And what you also need to think about is like sometimes if you're buying something that is going to spike or is spiking, some of these TCG vendors are not going to ship it to you. And like Cool Stuff Inc. will always ship it. So like if there's something like time sensitive that I want to make sure that I'm going to get and that I'm not going to get this kind of story or something from, I will buy them from Cool Stuff, because I'm sure that they're not going to stiff me. Sometimes I'll do that with Star City too. If they have a bunch of copies and I need them for a partner or something like that, I'll just buy them from Star City, because it's like they're going to ship them. They're not going to give me some kind of like, trash. But anyways, thank you, everybody. Thank you, James. This has been awesome. And thank you for everyone who's been in the chat. I hope to see you in our channels, in our Twitters, and all that stuff. So this is Jonathan Medina signing off.
It's James Chillcott at MTG Critic on Twitter, and you can find us at mtgprice.com.
Bye-bye, everyone.